What's up, everybody? So today we're going to talk to the people that are out there trying to organize and trying to get their stuff together, and why your stuff's not working or why it's not coming together properly. And I'm gonna explain this to you because this was really interesting when I found it out. See, the organization that you have is supposed to have a public side and it's supposed to have a private side. Your private side is your foundation or your organizational private sector trust. Your public side is what the general public sees you as. So in the federal jurisdiction, because you have to have kind of a participant in all the jurisdictions, you would have like a non-for-profit, maybe a church 501c3. But inside that church, you would put a private membership council trust division inside. Okay, it's kind of like the Marines. They're land, sea, and air, right? Same thing. You got to have a division, okay? So your problem is you're trying to get to common law and arbitrarily chancery law or canon law, which is your community law, which is basically the Old Testament, right? Set up your community. And you're having problems because you're not thinking in layers. You're not thinking in layered abstraction. You're thinking in singularity. In other words, you think that when you drive a vehicle on your property that you don't need a license plate, but when you take that vehicle out into the public, it needs to be exempt from taxes, which means it needs to have a tax exemption. That's why it's a non-for-profit, because then it has a tax exemption, right? So when it's in the public, that's how the public sees it. So your other problem is you're not connected to the jurisdiction that you want to be connected to. And you don't understand how the post road system or the switching stations or hubs work. You don't understand United Parcel Service is the private sector, territorial, and national conveyance, right, system. And you don't understand that unless you go through a jurisdiction that carries the hub that you need, or you're attached to an organization that has that specific type of law that you need, you are not connected to that law. And you have to have a proper sponsor that has the authority to exercise that jurisdiction. So if you want to go to common law, you have to have an ordained minister, because America is a church. You need an independent minister to sponsor you into that law, to charter your organization at common law. And then the organization that minister represents has to have a connection to where common law came upon the land, which would be Plymouth County, Massachusetts. So you'd have to establish a presence in Plymouth County, Massachusetts. If you want to deal with the Western Hemisphere or the Americas, then you would have to go to James City County, Virginia. If you want to deal with the nation, you have to go or the inhabitants, you have to go through Newcastle County, Delaware, because that's the anchor point where the William Penn Trust was attached to. And you have to have connections to all these different jurisdictions, which is what gives you those jurisdictions. And you have to be able to set up the organizations in those jurisdictions so that they function, so that you can attach to them and you get that jurisdiction. So you're not thinking in layers, and you're not realizing that all of these jurisdictions have a place of origin. So if I want to deal with the Florida Territory, like the organization down in Florida, when we move it when we move it officially from national to state territory, we have to set up a presence in St. Johns County, because St. Johns County is the original county back to 1823 for Florida. Does that make sense? So your problem is, and this is why post roads are referenced in the Constitution, because the ability to set up post roads is where you go to your switching stations, and that's where you get those jurisdictions from. But if you don't have a presence in those jurisdictions, you don't have the authority. So you can't, so like this organization, Re-Inhabit the United States of America, right? They're on the Northwest Ordinance. Well, you can't take the Northwest Ordinance and move it to North Dakota. That's a different territory. The North Dakota territory was carved out of the Louisiana Purchase, which means their switching station is in southern Louisiana, that they have to have a presence. So when they leave the North Dakota territory and they move back to the Louisiana Purchase, they are in the original Louisiana territory, which is the Louisiana Purchase. Then they can move on to the national jurisdiction or international jurisdiction and national jurisdiction in DC, giving them access to those jurisdictions. But it has to come through the Louisiana territory. So, you guys, this is all about circuits, and you got to wire up the harness, and it has to be, that's why they call them circuit courts. It has to be properly connected and have its nodes and switching stations, kind of like a railroad, and that's how you acquire access to these other jurisdictions. But then you have to have sponsors in your organization that have access to that jurisdiction. Like me, because I'm an independent international ordained Christian minister in North America, I have access to the North American jurisdiction. Because I'm an international bar association member from the University of London, I have access to English common law. Because I'm a general discharge military member, I have access to American general law. Because I'm under honorable condition from the military, I have access to equity, American equity, which is law and equity in the Constitution. So I can, and because I, as a longshoreman, when I was in Iraq and I ran convoys, I held the civil pay grade of a major. So because of that, I've held those positions. I have the ability to sponsor within my jurisdiction. Now, I can't do what a colonel does, a full bird colonel, because a colonel can be a base commander. So I can't command a base under military law because I don't have that rank. And I can't be a flag officer for NATO because I'm not a general. So I can't be an international chamber of commerce, which is what a general is. Generals are not American. There's no rank above colonel that's actually American. Generals are colonel and below, field officers or command officers, but they are not, that's why it's commander-in-chief, but they are not chief financial officers, which are international chambers of commerce, which is what generals are. So I hope this explains that there's a lot more layers that you guys have to build out, and you have to find the roots of the territory or origins and track your way back through and set up your sites. So good luck. God bless.